Jean Hoefliger of Hoefliger Wine Consulting. It is such an honor to have you here today on the Mr. Wine Guy podcast.
Thank you for having me. The honor is mine, actually. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I really like the fact that you bring education and exposure to the wine industry, which actually definitely needs it.
Wow, that really means a lot to me, man. When I get into the first part of my interview, I'm always very genuine, very excited. The words that I tell people, the way that they make me feel, the way that I know is going to make the listeners feel that same way. And just to have that kind of that feedback from you, that honor as well, if you will, the way you put it, man, it truly does mean a lot to me. When I look back on our first interview, when we did back, this was in the 50s, 51, interview 51 or episode 51. And one of the things that stood out to me more than anything was your passion. Like you have zero ego, man. You're one of the most humble guys in the world. And another reason today why I'm so excited to have you back on the Mr. Wine Guy podcast. First of all, this is the mid-season finale. I'm happy to have you back. You've been on the podcast before and now you're back. And so I'm excited to talk with you about your consulting. One of the things that I don't think we spoke a lot about in the first interview was just all of the things that you do on the consulting side of winemaking. And this is such a special thing in the wine industry to have somebody like you or Michel Rolland or other consultants that come together and help the blending process for individual brands and individual wineries. And there's such a need for that. And it's so special because you have your hands in so many different areas. But you have this Jean Hoefliger about yourself, but you also have this way of working with each individual brand to see the success of that brand. And I don't want to go on and on, man. You are a huge inspiration to me, but it means a lot to have you back here today, especially during Premiere Week, man. You're super busy. So I appreciate you very much, my brother.
No, honestly, thanks a lot. And you're the type of personality and person that the wine industry needs. I think in the US, the wine industry really needs to rethink itself as far as accessibility and taking away the intimidation factor that sometimes wine has on people. And by democratizing this, by making people understand that you can trust your palate, educated or not, because it relates to an emotion and to therefore a taste. And people like you, even your blog title, Mr. Wine Guy, it has a tone and an approach that is so much more accessible. And I think people need that. The wine world need that because it's ultimately nothing but an emotional response to a product. So yeah, you're right. I consult, right? Because when you think about it, as a winemaker, you get one shot per year at making wine if you follow a vegetative cycle. So if I consult for more people, you're actually exposed to more equation faster. So you're exponentially actually learning more things that you can actually apply from sometimes from one place to the other. So it's really beneficial to me, to my knowledge, and to really improving wine because I don't particularly believe in a perfect wine. I think I more believe in a perfect bottle because it so relates to the time that you drink it and the people you're with. And so my job as a consultant, you have two types of consulting. First, you have a consultant where the winery has its entire team. They have a production team, and you're there to be side by side to doubt them, to help them, hopefully not only blend, but find the right way in a way, operational organization to maximize the potential of their grapes in their vineyard. And then you have other consulting where you're actually the winemaker because the brand doesn't have a team and hire you and you and your team to make that one. But in any case, I always see it as a constant progress, as a way to consistently doubt what you do. And I think that's really the role of a consultant ultimately is to doubt what others do or doubt what you do in certain case to be able to improve the product.
Wow, man. To say that you only have that one shot a year, it can be a little intimidating. I could imagine knowing that you have this one moment, this one opportunity. I saw you were at the Super Bowl, and when you think about the one shot a year, man, the pressure, it's just like going to the Super Bowl. Like every single year, you're putting yourself up in this competitive state and putting out wines that are going to be considered like a 100-point wine would be like a Super Bowl win, or a 99-point wine would be like a Super Bowl win. And the pressure to do that every single year. And the cool thing about you versus a team in the NFL is you're going to the Super Bowl every year. It's not like you're just going to do it here and there because you have a good franchise, and the 49ers, they've proven themselves. And but dude,
Yeah,
like
you
when you
almost made me cry when you started talking about the Super Bowl, because obviously I'm a Niners fan and that was a difficult loss, but what a beautiful game. One thing that I want to mention, because you nailed it on the head. Your pressure is actually even greater when you start working with outstanding terroir. What do you mean by a terroir? The interaction of a plant with the climate in the soil and the people surrounding it, the culture surrounding it. And when you're exposed to outstanding terroir in any place of the world, your pressure is even higher. That's when you doubt yourself even more. That's when at harvest, when you have to decide when to pick, what type of fermentation or extraction you want to do. That's when, for me, the real pressure comes in, because it's like having Mahomes or whoever you want to say, Purdy or something like that, and knowing that when you have such talent or such team, you don't have a choice but to perform. And I think that's the real pressure.
Yeah, absolutely, man. This consulting side of this conversation is so good. I wanted to start and talk about growing up in Switzerland. And if people want to listen to episode 51, we do talk about your experiences growing up. You went to law school and you were in business school and you realized that this wasn't your thing. And growing up in Switzerland, you got your viticulture and enology degree and all these degrees in the wine industry associated with wine. But I want to fast forward because I'm really feeling this vibe. I'm really feeling this moment. I want to go ahead and get to Newton, '01 to '05. And I also want to parallel Alpha Omega '06 to '21. So you're the winemaker for both of these brands. Now you're just a full-time consultant. When you were the winemaker, let's just start at Newton. So when you were the winemaker at Newton, was there this kind of like moment where as the winemaker you're looking at the other side of the winemaking, looking at the consulting and saying, man, I really think I could do this one day? Or were you always just set on being a winemaker and that was it?
Actually, it's funny that you say that. The two things that kind of positioned me when I was at Newton to start looking at making multiple brands, multiple SKUs per year, was first the demand, obviously. When people started, in my two first clients, I actually had already at Newton. Montevero in Tuscany was one, and Maldonado was the other. Maldonado because he was, and his father was for Newton, and they asked me to make their brand. And then Montevero because they came to taste Newton and got to know me and asked me 2 years later to actually help them with their project. And that's when I, at the same time, learned from looking at Michel Rolland that I met when I was at Newton in '01 and seeing what he was doing. And the amount of, look, I've encountered plenty of consultants that say, oh, it's delicious. But for me, that's really not how it works. As a consultant, you're supposed to be there to doubt and to make the final product improve. And what I loved with Michel Rolland was every time I would expose him to the question or wine, he would always say, okay, that's good, but we can do this. Okay, this is great, but we can make that. This year, for example, I had 5-time 100-point wine on different things. And for me, I look at these things, I'll never forget, because I was with the GM, for example, tasting with Dunnock, and Jeb looks at me and says, man, you must be happy with this wine. And I looked at him and said, yeah, I'm not. And my GM looked at me after and said, dude, you can't say that. You got to say, yes, you are. And I said, I won't lie. I won't lie to people because who I am is really doubting what I do. And no, I'm never satisfied. When I'm going to get 100, I want 105. When I get 105, I want 110. And that's really, that consulting. So when I was at Newton, I started learning from Rolland, seeing what he was doing, getting contacted by these first brands to help them establish a brand, build a brand, improve a product, and really create an expression, an emotion in the bottle. That's when I said, look, it's gonna be magical. And what seemed to have trickled from that is and you mentioned it, and from Newton, I go to Alpha Omega. Alpha Omega, I'm approached by Eric and Robin to come and join them to start the brand. And fairly fast, they asked me to work on the business side and the production. And I realized at that time, okay, which I did also with Montevero already before Alpha Omega, is what I really enjoy is creating a brand and being part of the business decision the marketing decision and the production side at the very beginning, because I think a huge part of the DNA of a brand is to make sure that the product matches the packaging, matches the story. And so when the project comes to a financial sustainability, then I focus only on wine. But I like that. And my career so far has been that. A lot of time I've been contacted with brands that wanted rebranding or new project that would start and need help. And honestly, today, most of the time people leave me alone on the winemaking side because they say,
Yeah.
and they actually ask me about 70% of questions on the business more than the production itself.
Oh, wow, that's cool. Yeah, that's actually pretty cool. Like when I look at your branding now, like you have definitely evolved and you're still doing amazing things with the consulting, but your branding has evolved in such a way that I see the growth and I love it. And I can just imagine the growth that will continue for you throughout the years. I always feel like the story is never like the story is just being written, right? And I feel that way with you and other people that I interview on this show. When you were talking about the blending process and how you make the 100 point wine, and I want to jump in, you actually have a quote on your website, and it says, I don't believe in perfection in wine, but I'm going to fight my entire life to find it. One of the questions that I was going to ask you was about the 100 point wine, and do you ever feel like the 100 points really isn't as good as you could have made it? And I think you answered that. But my next question, my follow-up was going to be, if you make a wine that's like 97, 98, 99 points, do you feel like that was the best place for that wine? Or do you feel every single time you make a wine, it has to be 100, or that maybe that particular wine at 100 points, you could be better in general? Or do you feel like 98 points for a wine is exactly what it should have been if you get that score on something else?
I think first we need to define perfection. And you quoted the website. My definition of a perfect wine and why I will fight my entire life for it is a wine that is loved by all at any given time. And because we have to realize the subjectivity of wine, you have to stay humble as a winemaker of saying that 100 point wine or 98 point wine not suit certain people in style or in time. Meaning that the specifically wine on a rainy day after you've been laid off is not going to taste as great as when you're on the Tuscan coast on vacation with your wife. And all that subjectivity of wine is also part of it. And so for me, it's really important to first understand that. Second is, look, not one wine that I've drank in my entire life, including the 61 Latour, 47 Cheval Blanc, 94 Maya, for example, in Napa Valley, 2002 Harlan. There's a bunch of these iconic wines, 74 Heights. In every wine that I taste, I think, recognize greatness, but I also can say, oh, what about if that? And the only time I cannot, especially on the older wines, you're like, wow, this wine is 60 some years old and it's still dense, it's still vibrant, it still has life, it reaches its amazing wisdom that humans reach through aging. And so for me, that's where, if the day I'm satisfied with what I do, I should stop doing it.
Wow, that's incredible, man. And that's not only good information or something good to say in a wine podcast, but there's people that are listening to this podcast that aren't necessarily like my goal with this podcast is to bring the wine industry together, to bring people to a place where they can approach wine from a fun place, from an environment where they can learn. And I appreciate your compliment in the beginning of this interview because ultimately, man, that's my goal. I want this generation or this time that we live in to approach wine and for wine to want to approach that person as well. I don't want people to feel intimidated. And so I appreciate you telling me all that. Thinking about the things that you just said, you reminded me of another question I wanted to ask you. Was there ever a time in the wine industry where you knew better as a consultant to make a decision in a blending or maybe you were like working with a particular vineyard and you didn't know if you needed to work with that vineyard or whatever the case. And then you looked back on it and you were like, man, I should have gone with my gut. And with that being said, how important is your gut when you're being a consulting winemaker?
Look, I think the sensitivity is huge. It's
Mhm.
I'm asked often, do you think you have a gift? I don't think I'm the gift because I don't have confidence in my own self. And I think in a way it's sad. Some people would say and say you should. And on the other side, I think it's my greatest asset because by not being confident and not thinking I'm any better than anybody else, I position myself in doubting more, therefore more progression. So I think that's second, the number of time that I go back and say, should I have done that or should I? Yes, it has happened, but it has happened both ways, obviously. It has
Mhm.
happened in time where, oh man, I should have listened to this or I should have done, or the opposite, where people forced me to go one way and I should have listened to me, and other time where I went my way and I should have listened to others.
Mhm.
And that's why I really love sharing. This morning, I blended a few brands, the debate included, where with 22s, and it was a fairly interesting intellectual, but I was surrounded by 5 other people of my team, and I always ask them, give me your thoughts. What do you think? Because their doubt or any client's doubt forces me to double check, triple check, and therefore ultimately the product quality ends up winning. And so I think that more brain is always better than one. And therefore, when I blend, I usually tend to surround myself with the people. And honestly, is even on all the ones that I make alone, I usually ask an outside opinion. I'll ask a couple of winemaker friends to come and taste and say, hey, everything in check there? Or,
Mhm.
you know, and have them give me a feedback because we all have a different sensitivity. And often I ask older people because they went through different trends of the wine industry as well. And therefore their palate skill is different and it's only progress. To summarize that, the first 10 years of my life were working on polymerization. How do you bind tannins, color components, and polysaccharides to make a mouth feel better?
Mhm.
Right? Pretty much microbiologically, it binds the longer chain, and so it gives a bigger mouth feel when you taste the wine.
Mhm.
But aging wise, it's also more stable in time. So the first thing, I maxed out that talent or it's not really a talent, the knowledge of how to polymerize as almost too much. And now for the last some years, I've been focusing on, okay, now that I have that density, that texture, how do we make sure that we also have aerial lightness and precision of fruit and acidity? And so the more chapter I write to my winemaker book, the more I'm going to be closer to my definition of a perfect wine, which we all know it's like trying to catch the wind. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, you said a bunch of amazing things right there. But one of the first things that you said that really stuck out to me is when you're with your team or when you're in a setting, you're consulting and you have everybody around, you're not just sitting there. And I know, we talked about this in the beginning of this podcast and in the last podcast. You're very much not an ego guy. We all know that. You're very humble. And hearing you say that you don't have the confidence, I know what you mean when you say that, and that just is a testament to you as a person and as a winemaker. So let's say you're in this room and you're like, give me all the criticism. Tell me what you think. Let's look at this from like the maximum amount of criticism, if you will. When you're blending, let's take away from the people and let's focus on the wine. As a person that's consulting, do you intentionally blend off to see, okay, this is exactly where I don't want to go. Okay, so this is the criticism that you're asking for, but when we're not talking about people anymore, this is the criticism that you're looking for in the wine. So and you're very like, obviously you've got all the experience and the skill. So you blend way off in order to see, okay, this is where I don't want to be. And then you find yourself blending to where you do want to be. Or do you already have that dialed in and do you just go straight for where you want to be?
So that's a great question. And it's actually an in-between answer. When I blend, I take a wine, I think about people. It's not, I never, I really tend to look at the greatest qualities of the wine and the greatest faults.
Hmm.
And so I always have these two. So when I blend, I see, okay, one of the qualities of this particular log, blend it with together, and then I taste that base, and then I say, okay, I'm still missing this. So I could take that. It's true that when I blend, sometimes I say, oh, I'm gonna need probably 3 to 4% of that, but I'm on purpose add 10% to go too much to
Yeah.
see will that go through? And often I have the instinct that's probably not, but I try to push the envelope further just to make sure that this is not better. And then I scale back in the improvement phase with more precision and smaller percentages. So yeah, it's really, it's not rocket science. It's really just being able to attach a vision, I think, of the wine in whatever you're comfortable with. For me, I'm comfortable with humans, with art, with visual, like we
Hmm.
all are. In the sense we use 80% of is sight. So,
Yeah.
so I always look at wine the way I would look at a person. Is it fat? Is it fat, round, and voluptuous? Is it austere and linear? Is it deeply intellectual? Is it paralysis by analysis? And so, and I take the great advantages, the best assets of the wine, and see their greatest fault, and then put them together like I would build the education of my children.
Jean, when you're with a team and you're blending, are you, when you walk in and you sit down, everybody knows who you are. Like you're an icon, you're the guy. Like when a winemaker sits down next to you and they say, okay, we want to do this, are they looking for you to give them the answer 100% of the time? Do you ever find yourself like bantering with a winemaker and like the two of you can't ever seem to see eye to eye, but they're actually relying on you, but it's a good banter? Or do you find yourself most of the time just giving, I guess what my question is, there a side of you that has a singular perspective that's I'm going to focus on what I want to show them, but I also want the brand to show me what they want? Or do you find yourself most of the time having a receptive brand, or are you just like button heads, but in a friendly way?
Most of the time, it's friendly, and most of the time, I ask for butting heads.
Okay, I
Because
like that.
that butting heads will ensure one thing. And I'm going to give you an easy example. If I'm sitting down with a winemaker, we're blending, and he says, I don't, yeah, I think we shouldn't. I'm going to either let him blend his way, and then I'm going to blend, and the winner wins. I don't care. The ultimate challenge or ultimate goal is the product itself. It's almost useless for me to say, okay, my blend's better or not. I don't care. What I want is the best one coming out. So yeah, it's true that it has happened a couple of times in my career, not a lot, where the winemaker was so set in his ways that ended up not working. And usually it's never facing me. It's back with ownership. And it says, I'm not really understanding this, or I don't really have, I don't see the added value. And I give you a polar opposite. I have a client in Texas where the winemaker, and I could share because we get along, it's William Chris, and the winemaker, Tony, at the beginning was very hesitant. Was not, I don't understand why we're taking this guy on board.
Yeah.
And over time, he understood and saw what I can bring or help to the equation. And it's the polar opposite. Like he is, oh gosh, texts me and talks like that. And we exchange. It becomes an exchange. For me, the most valuable addition I can give is when people understand how much we can learn from one another. Of course, I see a lot of things, right? But by seeing a lot of things, I cannot be a specialist automatically in their specific equation. So I need sometimes them to help me guide, to help me find sometimes there's the details into the viticulture or the winemaking or the blending that is going to tweak and keep on progressing quality.
When I hear people in the interviews that I do talk about points, a lot of times I'm getting the impression that they don't care about points. But I feel like there's a part of them that really would like to see the most points that they could get out of a wine. When I think of you, you are like, you're like the poster child for points. and you've got so many hundreds, so many 99s, 98s, 97s, like 95 and up, you're perfect. You're a 100-point winemaker, 96, 97 and up. And when I think about you being so much about points, and also you have so many brands, do you feel that the points are more important or the brand's growth individually is more important, or do you find them equal? Because for me, I'm a sommelier in a restaurant here in South Florida. And it's like me saying, oh, I don't care if I get a bad review. Because ultimately, as a person who's in a position, I'm putting on a show, but I want people to be like overwhelmed. I want them to feel like they got a 100-point experience. So it's going to bother me because I'm not perfect. And I wish I could say I've always gotten like the best reviews. I don't get bad reviews, but I wish I could say that I always got the best reviews. But at the end of the day, I think it's important. So, as far as a winemaker, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that the points are most important or the growth of the brand or both?
Or the growth of the brand. I mean, and look, there's a major fault to a 100 point. You can only go down. Right? And it's so there's two things about 100 points. You will rarely see a brand or a wine that I make get 100 points in a row. Because if you do that, you mitigate or you add to wine certain things that make your wine taste the same year after year.
Yeah.
I get 100 points with different brands on the somehow basis and stuff like that. I'm lucky. I'm all you want, all right, the right vineyards and stuff like that. And hopefully it clicks. But it varies. And I think that's also the beauty of wine is the vintage to vintage variation will dictate a different set of points. Now, as a person, I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah.
So if you ask me, what's my goal? Is every wine is 100 point with every critics every year and every consumer. And I think that's where I defer. I will never be satisfied because when it's 100% of the wine that I touch make are 100 point, I'm going to want 100% of the wines to be 105 point. And so just like you in the restaurant, we don't always get the best reviews, but we are perfectionists that are aiming for perfection. And therefore,
100%, no pun intended.
good, yeah, exactly. Good or great, yeah, is never good enough. And I think that's why ultimately we also are good at what we do is we force ourselves for more all the time.
Yeah, I started doing these funny things like we have a tuna tower in the restaurant, and I started doing tableside service. So the tuna tower comes with some crispy tempura wontons for scooping, and I tell the whole story and I use my hands and I'm telling people like you're gonna get tableside service if you decide that you want to do this. It's got a truffle mayo and a spicy mayo, and it looks like this kind of sphere, if you will, not necessarily a tower. I'm like, but it's super good. And they order it and it comes to the table, and now I've started doing tableside service. So I bring the 2 spoons, I do a little clink clink, and I start like mixing up the tuna tower. And I've noticed that these little things people are so overwhelmed with. And I think that's like going along the lines of what you've been saying is like finding ways to increase the perfection or make the perfection a lot more than what you thought it was previously and trying to do better as you move along.
But I'm gonna tell you another really important thing that you clearly understood. What makes a wine even greater is the kindness of the person that either makes it or serves it or is with you while you consume it. And so your tableside experience is the great example. By you showing attention and being kind and nice, you're gonna anyway maximize the quality of what you're serving, just like wine. If the winemaker, I always tell Michel Rolland, as a joke, you have no talent in winemaking. Your real success in your career is your personality. It's absolutely clear that if Michel was an, excuse my French, asshole, he would have not succeeded the way he did. Just like you, right? We care about others. We mind others. And therefore, we want them to have a great experience. And we push ourselves, making wine, helping, serving the right wine, plating dishes, talking about dishes for their experience and ultimately their time to be better.
Yeah. I want to talk real quick about this vintage was one of I've heard people say, Jean, that this vintage was one of the best vintages of our lifetime. And I know somebody like you, we're looking for perfection. I think it's hard to not say that this vintage was pretty close to perfection. Now, some will argue Sonoma versus Napa. I'm just saying that there's been so much positive hype around the 2023 vintage. And especially for you, sometimes I've heard people say you had to try to make bad wines in 2023. So looking at this vintage and looking at your career, like I can't imagine you not just having this three-digit row of scores, like nonstop hundreds. Are you expecting that? Is the pressure on for you or for everybody in the wine industry? Like when the scores come out in a year or two, are you guys going to be sitting around being like, oh man, that sucks. I look bad because I should have made 100 point in 2023.
Yeah, no, look, it's a vintage of a lifetime. And the reason why is because we had ample rain. The plant was set to work. We had a very mild, consistent growing season.
Mm-hmm.
And usually Napa, if you take Napa, has 12 heat spell event per year on average. We had two, a really short one with not high temperature, with no early rain. So your ripening process of your phenolic content, meaning color, aromas, tannins, was exactly parallel to your sugars. So you could pick at any given time the perfect ideal ripeness with a fruit integrity that was 100%. There's no dehydration and no rain, no threat. So if you were patient enough, I think that's the key to the 23 vintage, you could ideally pick every single vineyard varietal that you had at the perfect time. And I think that's very unique. And it's depressing because you're probably never going to live that again in your lifetime. But it was amazing.
Jean, when you're a consultant, do you do work in the vineyard as well, or are you just now strictly at the table blending wines?
No, I work in the vineyard. Look, a great terroir dictates and imposes a great wine. So it has to start in the vineyard for sure. And the type of soil, the way the plant interacts with the climatic demand of that specific year, and what you do to the plant to adapt to these conditions is absolutely key for you to be able to perform. And I go in the vineyard, the team goes in on an extremely regular basis, more than most, because of that.
Mm-hmm.
A plant is like a human. Right? So you get to know them, to learn to know them.
Yeah.
And only through that time will you be able to succeed and really perform.
Yeah, I had a follow-up. I wanted to say, did you find yourself in this vintage spending way more time with different people, with different brands, trying to figure out, like you made it, the way I understood it, you made it sound like you had this big window of I could pick now, I could pick tomorrow, I could pick the next day. Did you find yourself like having to spend more time and give a little bit more attention to the vineyards with the brands in order, because a brand may be sitting there thinking, man, dude, like do we pick now? Do we pick tomorrow? What do you think? I felt like you were probably spending a little bit more time in the vineyard.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's the vintage where I doubted the most the picking decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and where I went back and double check, triple check, quadruple check myself the most. Because that window was wider, you had no threat, you could really pinpoint. And that means what? You doubt, you go back, you taste, you doubt, you go back, you taste. And that was consistency, the theme of 23. Because to give you an example, Denali Vineyard above Phelps and St. Helena, we picked 5 weeks later than the previous year. 5 weeks is a lot in the ripening process, right? And so that alone, you have to doubt, because after week one, you're like, am I making a mistake? After week two, you're like, is this completely crazy? And you keep on going and making sure. But then I think gray hairs and wrinkles teach you to be patient. And that patience was a key factor of 23.
That's amazing, man. I want to talk a little bit about pruning. I saw a video that you did, and this was about a year ago or so, but this video was you explaining how you do a delayed pruning. So I'm looking for a little bit of an opportunity for myself and other people to learn a little bit about the importance of pruning, but also you do a delayed pruning to play off of the frost season. So explain why you do that in such a way, because really the winemaking season, if you will, I believe it starts like when the frost is coming or in the winter, because you're really prepping those vines to get you to spring, to get you to summer, and all the things that are associated to getting you to harvest and picking. So talk a little bit about pruning and the delay of pruning and why it's so important to you to play off frost.
So pruning is cutting the plant for the plant to give the woods and the clusters in the right position and amount that you're looking. And by delaying cutting, you delay the, especially when the sap is coming back, right? The year before at winter, the sap stops flowing in the plant itself and it goes in dormancy. And then when the soils warm up, the sap kind of starts moving again. And you can delay the speed of bud break by delaying pruning. And so you
Yeah.
wait to prune because once you prune, you took all this wood away, and the plant has as much sap because the root system is not touched for much smaller amount of wood. So it's going to push your bud to break and to grow the vegetative side of the plant much faster. And so when you don't prune for longer, you slow the plant down. And that means that the bud break and the small growth, what we call 2 or 3 leaves out, is going to slow down and it's going to be delayed. And it's usually going to happen after these spring frosts. The risk of freezing is not really winter because the plant is sleeping. It's much more as soon as you have a vegetative growth or these buds are pushing. And so by pruning later, you delay that push, and therefore these frosts that usually happen March and beginning of April, suddenly your plant is pushing later and you're outside of that zone of risk.
Was there ever a vintage where you felt like that decision worked against you? You felt like you pushed past the frost, but then it got cold again, and all of a sudden you were dealing with it again. Was there ever a
Oh yeah,
time, or maybe
sure.
more than one time?
Yeah, there was a year where one of my clients on Spring Mountain, Sonoma side, Vineyard, it's called Audace, and we had a frost in mid-May, which I've never seen. And we actually turned off the frost fan because it's completely out and it froze and literally killed 80% of the crop. So that happens. And obviously we should have had that frost fan on
Mhm.
at the time. The person should have not taken it out. But yeah, of course it happens.
Yeah. What fascinates you, Jean, more about consulting and being a consulting winemaker versus when you were a winemaker at Newton or a winemaker at Alpha Omega? What is the fascinating part that really stands out to you?
Learning, curiosity. The more you're exposed to different vineyards and different wine, the better it is, and the more you learn. And I think a great sign of intelligence is curiosity. And therefore, if you're curious, you want to learn more. And to be exposed to all these different terroir, vineyard varietals, climates, cultures is so enriching that it makes my life a true heaven.
So I want to ask you a question real quick. You consult for so many brands. You consult for Harbison, Arrowhead, AXR, The Debate, just to name a few. Is there one, and not to make anybody feel bad, but is there one that really is special to you that you get personally excited about when you get to consult for them, or are they all just as equal to you as far as excitement?
Yeah, look, excitement, you always have to perform. Then it comes to people and the
Hmm.
relationship you have with people. And the greatest adventures in life are usually the ones that that you enjoy, the people that you're with. And I had the luxury in my life, or I have today, to have a no hassle policy. So you surround yourself with people that
Yeah.
you want to hang out with. And I think that's probably the greatest luxury that I can wish for.
Yeah, I love that, man. Your brands that you work with are so special, and I love seeing what you do with each and every one of them. And looking back at 2021, this is the time you decided to step away from Alpha Omega and become a full-time consultant. Is consulting going to be the thing that you always do from now on? Are we ever going to find like a Jean Hoefliger estate in California, or maybe there's going to be a chateau in France or Switzerland, or are you going to go back to winemaking one day, or is it going to be consulting?
Yeah, no, but I am like this place, XR. I'm the winemaker. I'm the one that makes it stuff. So the team racks and stuff like that. But I'm the winemaker. And that's where the situation I'm in is a little bit the best of both worlds. I'm involved in every single decision or task of the winemaking, but on the other side, I'm exposed to so many other things. And I think that's a true luck. So I really like that pattern and pace of life.
Hmm. I was looking on your website and you have this thing, the Unfiltered collection. Does that differ at all from your consulting, or is this like a special kind of allocation of wines that you make? Can you explain that for me?
Yeah, the Unfiltered Collection is the sales arm of the company. So the clients that wish to join the Unfiltered Collection are sold by my team because I found that little brands, as far as volume is concerned, tend to not get a lot of attention in distributors. And so to have support and to have them part of a portfolio leverages the risk of these brands and gives them a little bit more pool with big distributors, so they're not as lost in their portfolio.
Wow, I love that, man. And that kind of leads me into my next question. I was going to ask you to share how people can learn more about you. How can they find you on social media, websites, and also be a part of the Unfiltered Collection, which will all be linked in the show notes, by the way.
Thanks. Just go on jhwineconsulting.com. You'll see it all. And as far as social media, it's my name. It's Jean Hoefliger, JeanHoefliger, Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, feel free to DM me. I'll answer and shoot you my cell phone. You can text me with any questions. And Mike, again, thanks a lot for having me.
Man, thank you so much. And when I say your last name, and everybody says it that way, I can't even hear what I'm saying when you say it so much better, but I say it Hoefliger and you say it the way you say it.
Yeah, Hoefliger, but you're actually much better than most in the US. It's a German based, Swiss German based name. So congratulations.
Nice, man. I have one closing question before we finish up. I know you got premiere going on, and that's pretty exciting. Like I said, you took the time to spend with me on such a busy occasion. But I like to finish off the podcast with one final question. And my question for you is, what's one thing that you've learned as a consultant that has been pivotal for you that maybe you didn't previously know that has made you a better consultant today? And how do you feel that piece of advice could be helpful for someone listening? And they don't have to be working in the wine industry. They could be in the wine industry or just what they're doing in general. What would your answer be for that?
A little bit of what I touched earlier. Respect others as much as you respect yourself. And love what you do because it's the only way you're going to be the best. If you wake up every morning to play and you're respectful and kind to others, only success comes. And I learned that from even obviously Michel Rolland, and that's probably my biggest lesson about any task or any professional position that people may find themselves in.
Wow. Jean, I want to tell you, man, that being on the mid-season finale, being here today, having you on this podcast, it's been 5 years. The last time we spoke, the podcast dropped on July 9th, 2019. And I remember I was listening to that episode. It was a really good episode. But man, this conversation has been so great. And I just want to tell you, man, from deep down, to hear you give me the feedback that you gave me, man, like I say what I say because I'm looking at people like you and all the people that I've had on the podcast or people that I even haven't had on the podcast as people that I admire, that I look up to, that do what they do. And especially for you, man, like you're such a person that I admire so much for so many reasons in the wine industry. But man, to get that feedback from you, man, that means a lot to me. It really, I don't feel like I deserve it. Like I feel like I'm you in a way. Like when I do this podcast, I come to this podcast from, I've said this before, like from a place of duty. I want to do it because I want to share and I want people to get to connect. But I'm always feeling like I can be left out. I want to just focus on you. And you gave me that love back. And so in closing, man, I just want to say, man, thank you so much, my brother. It means a lot to me.
Mike, anytime, I'm here for you. You're awesome, and I think your humble side will bring you to do what you've been doing for so many years, being great at the wine, at talking about it, at service, and at understanding our industry. So, thanks a lot for having me.